I know I'm at risk of dating myself a little bit, but one of the things that I loved doing as a kid was something called Mad Libs. I don't even know if this is still around. If you've never heard of it, look up Mad Libs and just have fun with it. Imagine your 8, 9, 10-year-old self going around with your friends and building some Mad Lib stories together. The idea was that you had a story in front of you that had some fill in the blanks that said noun, verb, adjective, adverb. You had to actually know the difference between those in order to participate. So maybe study up on that a little bit. But you would ask a group, give me a noun. They'd say, rock or something, and give me a verb. And they'd say jump. In the end, you would have a story where then the words that the other person gave you was the story that you told. And it was fun. It was hilarious. And it's something that I've got fond memories of doing. I love doing it. I had multiple Mad Libs books, etc. But why am I bringing this up here on the Presales podcast? Well, because we kind of talked a little bit about Mad Libs in the episode. I just finished recording an episode and we talk a little bit about that, about how we kind of treat our stories that we tell within our works today as Mad Libs, and we miss an opportunity. Welcome, everyone. This is the Presales podcast. I'm your host, Jack Cochran, and I just got finished talking to Jon Billett. He is the founder of StoryQuadrant, which is built on the idea that storytelling isn't a soft skill, but instead an industrial skill that's critical to success in today's tech sales environment. He has about 15 years of pre-sales experiences himself and has built a framework of storytelling that we talk about in the show today. And we should be doing better than saying company name had fill in the blank problem and got resolved with fill in the blank result with fill in the blank metric, which is the way that most of our stories that we tell with customers lands. We miss out on many opportunities to use these stories as a way to connect with people, as a way for them to have something memorable and build a memory of you. And that's exactly what we talk about. So stick around for that right after the break. Are you looking for a way to be a more skill-ready, enabled pre-sales professional? Or maybe are you trying to find a way to bring more soft skill development to your pre-sales team? Well, Presales Collective has courses and material for you to be a better SC. It's all through our Pro Plus membership, where you get access to all of our on-demand courses, a bi-weekly newsletter that has got some enablement material that you can bring right to your teams, right in the newsletter itself. You get leadership forums, you get discussion groups, all within that Pro Plus membership. And as a benefit, many people use their learning stipends that they have for the year, which should have just gotten renewed for you. But they use that for the membership. So it's something that you can put right as something aside that your company has set aside for you versus having to spend it out of your pocket. If you want more information on that, go to presalescollective.com and check out the information on the Pro Plus membership. Jon Billett, welcome to the Presales podcast.
Good to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been excited for this conversation. Storytelling is something that I really enjoy learning more about. I've spent plenty of times reading books, having conversations. I've sat through multiple sessions on storytelling. When I had a team, we did storytelling sessions where we'd practice the art of storytelling. I think it's a skill that everyone in sales, and especially pre-sales specifically, needs. I'd love to talk a little bit about your background with storytelling. It's something that you focus on. Most pre-sales and sales professionals, for that fact, think they're already telling stories in some way. If you talk to someone, always like, yeah, I've got stories that I tell throughout whatever I do, whatever presentation I'm making. But I know that you have a unique perspective on storytelling. What is that perspective and where did that come from?
Well, it always came from a place where I wasn't very good at presenting and I wasn't very good at telling stories, mainly because I realized people, especially in leadership positions, always encourage you to tell more stories, and you've got to tell more stories, and storytelling is a great form of communication. But actually, I realized that most of the enablement and guidance ended at that point. Everybody would nod and agree, this is, yes, we should. But there was never anything beyond that. And I kind of got a little bit hooked and fascinated with the structure of stories. And this is going back many, many years. So we've got this lack of guidance, and it's almost as though all of the enablement that I'd been exposed to focused on storytelling being a soft skill, almost like maybe even a talent that we're born with. You've got to have the right people in the room to tell the story that you want to tell. And I realized actually part of the issue was it was lack of structure. I see a lot of presentations and a lot of decks, and I think storytelling, people generally think about storytelling as one thing they insert into a presentation or a demonstration. And I see a lot of presentations and I see a lot of decks. People send me decks and I do some roasting on these decks, a bit of fun, and send them back. But if I go to a conference or an expo, I'm really drawn to looking at what people are using to convey a message, whether they're delivering that message alongside that piece of content or whether they're solely relying on that piece of content to deliver that message. And I'm really it's almost like an obsession now. I look at it and I think, all of these are all the things that you're doing wrong. These are all the things that you're doing really well. But actually the quality of all of this varies massively, right? And the most common observation that I see in all of these presentations and all of these demonstrations is lack of structure. There's no real story thread that runs throughout. There's no lovely circular moment where the ending is the beginning. And it seems like it's just a bunch of things glued together in the hope that there's a cohesive something there. But it's very rarely do you see something that absolutely wows you. I think you've really thought about that. This is now an obsession, but I see this over and over and over again. And I think part of the issue is structure. And I think that's it. We need to focus less on it is a soft skill that we need to focus on developing, but actually let's create a structure and scale that structure across an organization.
I've definitely seen the cohesive some things at work. You've seen a presentation where you're like, okay, you were told to say this and then that, but you really don't know why you're doing it. At the end of it, like, okay, we're done with the story. We can keep going, as opposed to something that really resonated with me. You mentioned that a lot of people approach this as a soft skill. And certainly that's the way that I've been thinking about it throughout my career. It's something you can develop. Certainly some people are better at it than others, that born skill thing. I know your approach is a little bit different, and looking through information that you've got posted online, stuff with StoryQuadrant as well, you talk about an industrial skill as opposed to a soft skill a little bit. What do you mean by industrial skill?
I say this all the time. Storytelling is an industrial skill. And I say that because, like any scalable process in a tech company, is built on structure, not sentiment. It's not just a feeling. If we think about it in engineering, we follow architecture patterns and we don't just go into it with inspiration. I think we can build something just with an inspiration. Right?
I hope not, yes.
I hope not, right? Yeah. In product, we use frameworks and roadmaps, and we don't think, it's not like a gut feel. Well, that would be ridiculous. In UX design, we design flows that drive behavior. We don't just worry about the aesthetics of it. So there's this underlying structure. And I believe storytelling works in the same way. It's a structured system for creating clarity, consistency, and memory at scale across an organization. Quite often people think about it as an art form, telling stories, but it's not. It's purely infrastructure in sales. You've got to have a structure, a foundation that you work from. Otherwise, what happens? Everybody is building their own flows and their own what feels right. And actually, if you take a step back, a lot of the time it isn't right. You're not creating information gaps. You're not hooking people and taking them to the next step of the story. You're using different story structures for the wrong purpose. And almost a rule book and a set of foundational skills for, if it's this type of story, use this structure. If it's that type of story, use that structure. And these are the stages that you need.
We do that for everything else in the sales process, right? We do that for how we do our discovery, how we walk through technical evaluation, how we do a proof of value, how we respond to a deep dive from IT perspective. We've practiced all those things. We've got roadmaps. We make sure everyone's through onboarding. Someone's onboarded when they know how to handle each of those scenarios. But you're right, storytelling, we're like, and actually I've been told and I've been guilty of saying, and throw some stories in there along the way. Like there's no structure behind it in most places. And I think you're right. Like that structure is what's missing.
Yeah, I believe it is anyway. And more conversation I have, I think I can convince most people now that's what's missing.
Especially if I'm sitting here listening to this, a lot of people are probably going, that's great. I'd love to do that. I'd love to have this structure that's in place. But let's say you're an individual contributor and going, but my company doesn't have that for me. There's nothing available. Or if you're leading a team going, I don't have any place to start. Okay, we're aware of the problem. What steps could I take to start building that? Like, where do you get started with something like this?
Two things, really. One is you have to understand, most people believe in their inability to tell stories. That's the first thing a team must overcome. Even if you tell everybody in the room, you're in a safe space, put your hand up if you're a good storyteller. And most people will say, I'm not, but I know somebody that is. We always do that. Now, the first thing is we are so convincingly good at telling stories. That's a little micro narrative, right? That we tell ourselves about who we are and our abilities. And actually we end up believing that because we're so convincing, we use that structure. So that kind of feeds into itself in a negative way. So the first thing is, which is what I do in the workshops, is get people to create stories and make them realize they can do it. That's the first thing. And start to build confidence to get over that, because you don't want people shying away from it. I don't know how to tell a story, so I'm going to hide behind a demo. I'm going to hide behind the corporate pitch deck. The first thing is you've got to throw everything open and say, yeah, everybody can do this. We all do this. We make sense of the world around us in this format. So we do it every single day. So we're just using this now with a bit of structure to say, okay, how can we use all of this experience and how we process the world and bring it into a framework that we can use in sales? The second thing is, and this is quite odd, I'm not going to put you on the spot. This is rhetorical. If I ask people, what type of stories do you want to tell? I am amazed at the answers.
I mean, even as you're asking me, I'm like, I know you said you weren't, but as you're asking the question, I'm going, I would have to think about it for a second. I don't think I've ever really considered what type of stories I like to tell.
So 80 to 85% of the time, I guess it's success stories. And that's a good type of story. And it's an obvious choice because the word story is kind of in the title of that. So we know we want to tell, we'd never lead with a success story. The second most popular answer is engaging stories.
It's not really a story type. You're just describing how you're telling the story, right?
Right. So we're describing what the result of that story, right? That's what you want the story to be. That's not what. And I thought, this was really eye-opening. And I started asking this question. The two questions I asked were, what type of stories do you want to tell? And are you a good storyteller? I have probably asked thousands of people those two questions now. And I get to the point, I just stand back and think, has nobody ever asked you this before? We've never even thought about the answer to those questions before.
People don't really know what they're going after, right? If all we're going after is I want to be engaging and tell success stories, which is an interesting choice on both hands.
Yeah, and I'm used to it now, but that is the response that people, I do get some random ones thrown in there, but oddly, the most common story type that I would assume sellers to want to tell is a solid positioning story. And I think only one person has ever said to me, I want to tell a positioning story. I'm like, how is this not right? Positioning stories, you need them before success stories in the majority of cases. And positioning stories are used by marketing, used by sales, and they are incredibly valuable early on in the cycle. But people always jump to, I want to tell really good success stories. But you've got to get to that point.
I get the logic behind why someone is thinking that. They're going, if I tell a great story that has 30% more revenue in it or 15% reduced cost, that isn't that great. And I've actually talked to people who their assumption is if the person hears themselves in the story, they'll just assume that you'll win from telling the story, which I've never seen that work. I've never heard someone ever listen to my success story that I've told and say, yes, that's me. Where do I sign? It's been more of interesting. Can I talk to them? It's a story, but I don't really know. It doesn't really do anything. It's just numbers. Positioning stories, though, does sound like it could have more meat on the bone of helping someone to understand what this is even all about and why I should care. But we never go there. I mean, rarely go there or even think about it.
Right. So this is interesting. Right. For me, a success story perspective, that people jump to that point. I don't logically know why that happens, but I would also say that people who jump to success stories, the majority of companies that I work with, their success stories aren't stories. They're case studies that have list out facts that have happened to a company. Now, the first thing that you get, the example that you gave was increasing revenue or increasing efficiency, 30%, whatever that. This is also something which I tackle head on now because I'm going to jumping around a little bit. And we'll land on this again shortly. But one of the things, I feel really lucky that I can have these conversations. And I was in front of a group of about 100 SEs a few weeks ago. And I've noticed something over the last few years that I wanted to do a podcast without AI coming up. But actually, AI is making everybody sound the same. And a lot of tech companies now, their messaging's all around the same phrasing and the same terminology. And actually it's making, right, if you go back 5 years, you're aware everybody knew, right, what the differentiators were. But now the buyers are like, kind of listening to all these tech companies spouting the same thing. Not many people are denying that, which I also find quite funny. So it's happening and nobody's doing anything about it. This is something which I talk about quite a lot in, I think, nearly every session now I bring this up. We are going to get onto this subject, absolutely. But the phrasing around from success stories generally don't take a company on a transformational journey, where the company was before and the arc that followed and where we ended up taking that customer on the end of their journey. That doesn't ever really happen. It's normally a data dump of all of this stuff, facts and figures and phrasing that's very generic that happened to a company. So what happened is the phrasing is a semantic delivery of information. It's sort of fact-based, so it actually won't persist for very long. The second thing to recall is the sheer volume of standard phrasing that people are now using also doesn't really lend itself to being very, very memorable. So actually, I think we've written 40 success stories for companies this year, and they are proper stories written as a story, not as a case study. He used case studies in press releases and as much data as we can get to actually write the story. And quite often now these stories have been recorded with a voiceover actor and then the visuals up top, and actually we end up with a really nice asset that people can watch and understand the transformation that happened. So even though most people are going down the road of we want to tell more success stories, they don't even have success stories in a structure that they can tell anyway. So we almost need to rethink that part on its own.
A lot of the formulas, I think you're right, feel very cut and paste. One company particularly I worked at, we actually had a formula that we were told to put our success stories into, which was company name had XYZ problem. They used us to using XYZ feature and had XYZ outcome, which literally you could mix and match. You didn't have to know the customer. You could pick any of the logos, say they had any of these problems, implement any of these features, and pick a number outcome. It all didn't matter because it wasn't telling a story. It was a grab bag of Mad Libs. Or familiar with Mad Libs, when you're a kid, right? You give me a company name. Okay, give me a problem that you were having, right? Okay, fill that in. We were playing Mad Libs with our success stories. And so I love hearing that, a more thoughtful approach to actually telling the story about a customer and what they went through with actual visuals. But what you're saying, these are things you actually spent time to develop the stories and put them together rather than just fill in the blanks.
Correct. That then creates a more episodic experience, which is an experience that people can connect with and they remember. And it's purely down to the structure, the phrasing, and the shape of the story. Not many companies create proper success stories. But if we then jump to positioning story, the structure is very different.
Because I know you've got positioning stories through StoryQuadrant. You also talk about discovery stories and sort of the story that they tell, right? Kind of those 4 pieces. So let's talk about some of the other ones because we're not familiar with positioning or discovery or kind of the other distinct story types and how you would utilize those.
Yeah, so the journey was this. So if I would ask somebody, what type of story do you want to tell? They'll say success story. Okay, great answer. The follow-up question would be, what's important about a success story? What really matters? And the 2 R's which come back are relevant and relatable. Okay, good. That makes sense. You're basically telling your prospect a tale of the past of how you helped transform another company, but it needs to be relatable and relevant. How do you make it relatable and relevant? You've got to do a bit of discovery. You've got to do a little bit of discovery. Ideally, as much discovery as you can, really. But then I was thinking, most of the discovery that I ever did as an SC, and I was an SC for 15 years, it really started with a list of questions. A list of questions that I was asking a company to try to figure out, and it was like I was peppering them. And I think the optimum number of questions now is about 13 or 14 before people really think you're asking them too much now.
They're just going to wonder, what's this interrogation I'm going through, right? Or am I interviewing for your time, right?
Exactly. So I was thinking at this point, what are we really doing here? We are effectively stepping into your prospects' world, right? We are stepping in, and they didn't just wake up one morning and decide, we need to buy some of that technology. I'm going to get on the phone, we're going to buy it. That didn't happen. If it did, that would be very fruitful for a lot of companies, but that's not the case, right? So I always explain it. Imagine if you're stepping into the exposition of a story and you're stepping into this world and you've got to look both ways. You've got to look back and understand all of the things that your prospect had done to the point of picking up the phone and contacting you as a vendor. So they would have tried things, and things would have failed. Some things would have been a success, but they couldn't scale it. There are a number of stages where they got to a point where they've decided we cannot do this anymore. And let's learn from that. Let's learn why these things. Did they go to another vendor? Did they try to build in-house? What are the things that happened to lead to this point? So that gives you a good understanding of where they are and in context, right? And at some point during this discovery, you will be able to link it to the most relevant and relatable success story because there becomes this link between the two. Oh, you remind me of this other company, which we did this. If you look in the other direction, and imagine that you're looking in the other direction to the future of a time where you have successfully sold your technology to this company and they've had a transformation and you're at the resolution of the story and now you're looking back. So what would those stages have looked like and what outcomes would that organization benefited from? And I think if you're just trying to build a story around them, it's far more logical, it's far easier, and you know the journey that you want to take them on both ways. So you kind of got this natural framework around it. And I think that just seems to make more sense. If you explain, you're stepping into their world. Now, this is the other thing, which I also find quite, interesting, that on average, I think now vendors get 5% of the time face-to-face with a prospect, thereabouts, during their entire sales cycle, the selection process. So if you only get about 5% of the time, that's shared across around on average 3 other vendors, right? So you only get a really tight snippet. So every time you step into their world, you kind of almost got to maximize the time you get with them and make it as engaging as possible and also make every moment matter. And this is what I'm saying. If you step into their world virtually, you're missing out on another 1 or 2%, because if you step into their world in reality, you actually get there, meet them, you're going to get a few minutes before the meeting, a few minutes after the meeting, and then you expand the time you get with them. So you can step into their world virtually or physically. Physically is far better. And I think more and more people are now doing that. But basically, you're stepping in as an observer and understanding their world from a story perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very critical. And you're right. The data is all there that by the time you talk to your prospect, they've done so much research. They likely already have their mind mostly made up. They're potentially just confirming what they already know. All the things that we've been told around it's our job to help someone understand, they probably already understand. So our role is different. And so that's where I think storytelling can be such a big part of that. Getting in person even better, because the stories that you could just tell or the connections you can make in person are even better. But even if you can't, using that time to make sure you're connecting with them, as you were saying, putting it in their perspective is really important. So with this focus that we have on being more in person, I guess getting to the idea around the positioning stories, how does that fit into all of this?
So we've got success stories, then we've got discovery stories, and then we've got, I labeled this your story because there's 2 parts to this. We judge trustworthiness within about 1/10 of a second of meeting somebody. So based on what they look like, how they talk, and we're going to categorize the person that we're meeting in one of 4 ways. We also default to stereotypes and biases and past experiences. If we've met somebody with the name Jack that we didn't really like, and you remind me of that person, right? So all of this layers on top of how we feel. Even if you have multiple interactions with somebody which are positive after a very, very negative initial interaction, it takes a lot of effort to change the opinion of somebody after the fact. So your story is broken into 2. One is making sure that you're not labeled as another classic seller, another person who's not listening, another person who does this, and just want you out of the way. You can, most tech companies, run the risk of our first call decks also run the risk of actually labeling you as a threat, which kind of is not great. Awful situation if you're labeled as a threat. But ideally, we talked about the trusted advisor, right? We want to become trusted, so we actually want to be categorized as a friend. That's what we're after. Not best friend. I'm not talking about that, but somebody we can trust and be open and honest with.
Friendly, certainly, right? Someone who's not there to try and be a threat to them, and someone who wants to listen, probably also important.
Exactly. These are all important. We judge trustworthiness, I said, within about 1/10 of a second. But there's another threshold which seems to be around about the 4-minute mark, where you need to almost dig beyond those initial pleasantries and get one layer down to try and find some kind of shared level of interest or commonality between you and the people that you're meeting with. So you've got to realize that these timeframes are very, very limited. So your goal is to get people on board and connect with them within about a 4-minute period. So this is you, this is how you dress, this is how you listen, this is the volume, this is your tone, this is how you manage the room, this is everything about you. The other part of that is if somebody asks you, what do you do? What does your technology do? You need to do really a positioning story in a short window, maybe in 2 minutes. But it's a very different story. It's not a transformational journey like a success story. It's almost a look into the future and try to convince people this is why you should be buying our technology. And the use of hooks, information gaps, of trends, of pain, of differentiators, of contrast, the moment of contrast where you can carry on doing like this, or you can do it this way. You can do it that way, you can do it this way. The value of the evidence in the future state. All of these are chapters or segment stages in a very, very tight narrative. And lots of my conversations that I have as an example of this is what I use all the time. If you notice, it's becoming harder and harder to control the attention of an audience. People are checking out faster than they ever have before, and there are distractions everywhere, right? Phones, notifications. You can lose people pretty quickly. And the result is, as soon as you lost somebody, they're not listening, so they're not actually creating the memories from the things that you're saying. And that's not great, is it? What if I could make your presentations over 1,000% more memorable? The figure is actually 1,160% more memorable. That sounds ridiculous, so I rounded it down to the nearest 1,000. And that's actually 3 things there. They're actually addressed as a trend with attention, then the pain that's caused by the trend, and then a hook. And all of that happens in about 35 seconds, thereabouts. But that then sets up the story. And none of that, I didn't need to stop and tell anybody how many offices we got worldwide or how many SEs and how many A's.
The founder stories and the...
Nobody cares about that. Nobody can. I could say that outside. Nobody cares about that. Actually, most of the people in the company don't care about that, let alone a prospect who certainly has got no interest in that at that stage of the conversation. So there's all these stages, but they run seamlessly into each other. I'm running a few projects at the moment, creating positioning stories. And positioning stories can be delivered in 2 minutes, but they can also create the foundation of a first call deck. They can also, funnily enough, you can actually use them to drive a demo, a vision demo. And there's 2 or 3 stages where the demo actually really does shine in the story, but the setup and the finishing element are just narrative. But the tight part in the middle is how the technology reacts. So the two really work well together. So you've got positioning stories, your story, their story, success stories. And then the last one was the story they tell. And it all came from my experience. So I'm also a member of an organization called the Magic Circle. Some people know what that is. Other people have never heard of it. It's not the legal firm in London. I think it's the most exclusive magic club worldwide. And I used to spend a lot of time performing and watching magicians perform. And I realized that the best tricks are the ones that can be explained easily after the fact.
So not what you would think around really elaborate. The simplest ones tended to be the best as far as perceived by the audience best.
Because it's a story that then spreads afterwards. And I actually did a charity event on the weekend. I did 4 shows back to back for a local school raising funds. And some of the tricks were technically complex and I got a sense of satisfaction of delivering these. But actually, one of the tricks that everybody remembers is he stuck a sword through a balloon and the balloon didn't burst. And that's technically one of the easiest things that I did and probably the least impressive, but it's the thing that people can remember the most and retell afterwards. That's where it came from. I thought this is exactly the same. If you're spending 60 minutes presenting to somebody, you run the risk of creating something that they just can't tell. And the most important, the most valuable stories. So this isn't the story you and I right now, but if you tell somebody afterwards about it, you then put it into a story form. Or do you remember and how do you tell it? So I spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about it. How do you ensure that when you're not in the room, the story that you want to be told is being told? And there's a lot in there. There's a lot in that. So it's, keeping it tight with a really, really solid through line that will guide everything you show, everything you say. You keep it really, really tight. The phrasing, the emotions, and you can create emotions and you should create emotions. The feeling that you lead them with, the amount of presentations that I see fall flat right at the end. I think that is the most important moment.
That's what they're leaving with.
What they're leaving with, it's how they feel and what they remember. That is the number one hotspot. And it's like, any questions? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you can't end a flat like that. It's walk out of the room, someone going, I've no energy leaving it. No, I think you're absolutely right. That's
a lost opportunity, right?
Such a lost opportunity for sure. And speaking of which, I know we're almost out of time, so I want to leave you with that final opportunity as well. With been a great conversation, talking about the different sort of quadrants, the different things we need to think about around storytelling. Certainly some things that I'm walking away with today. But if someone wanted to implement one technique tomorrow in their next customer call, what should they start with right away? Let's end this with something big that they can walk away with.
It's an easy one. And people might be doing it already, but I'm guessing they probably aren't doing it. And that is giving a moment of contrast. So show the customer, the prospect, the world before and after your solution or your product. Almost side by side is in a narrative. Just bring this really close. You don't necessarily need slides for this. You don't need any drama, but just a clear contrast between, what they're doing today and what they could have in the future, because contrast becomes really clear in the mind. You can use contrast to drive attention on slides. You can do a contrast to actually create focus in a room. On a piece of art, you've got the light that shines on it to create, this is the important thing. And contrast is what makes the brain pay attention. And therefore, it's then how memories are formed. And the mind will then tag this change. So I say if there's no contrast, if you don't show people what the world is like and what it could be like, there's no contrast, there's no curiosity. If there's no curiosity, there's no memory. It actually all starts from novelty. Novelty engages attention. Attention creates focus. Focus then creates memory. It all comes from that. And if you show a novel way of really illustrating what the world is like today and what it could be like in the future, that moment of change can create a much more vivid memory.
That's perfect. I love that. Certainly something that will stick with me now coming out of this recording session. Jon, it has been a pleasure talking to you about storytelling. Real quick, for those who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn or StoryQuadrant.com. There's a little video on the homepage, and that is a positioning story as a video delivered by David Brent. You might know David Brent, the Ricky Gervais character from The Office. I've got a lookalike to actually record a positioning story for me. So that's all I've got on my homepage. And you can go there, you connect me from there, or you can LinkedIn me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jon. Really appreciated having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you for listening to the Presales Podcast by Presales Collective. Did you know that we also post on the Presales Collective blog following each episode? Head there to read through information on shows you might have missed or find another past episode to listen to. For more information on the Presales Podcast itself and to listen to those past episodes, visit presalescollective.com/podcast.